Since this is the freshest one, the Waldheim Waltz, I would like to start with that. And I remember I was a kid when this happened in 1986, and it was a big deal here because he operated around these areas. And you even said a couple of times that Tito probably knew about that. How do you explain this time gap between 1986, him becoming the president, the chancellor, and president, yeah, and everything what happened, and then you start making this film only in 2013, and it turned out that it was more recent, more actual than you ever thought it would be.
Well, as you saw, I was an activist at the time, and I shot some footage myself. But I included a little small piece, a small part of this footage in a film I finished in 1986. When the Waldheim affair happened, I was actually in the editing room, editing my film Paper Bridge, which I think was not shown here. It's strange. It's strange because, well, it would have fit together. But this was a film about Jewish identity of my generation, the generation which was born in the 50s, after the war, and had to deal with all kinds of questions. Why did the parents stay in Vienna after everything that happened? What about why don't we live in Israel? Why? And the Holocaust, and so on. So many questions. When I did this film, the Waldheim affair happened, and I shot some footage and included a little bit of it in this film Paper Bridge. But then I just forgot about the footage, I must say. And only, as you said, I think it was in 2013, I don't know why, for which reason, I took these cassettes from a shelf and watched them with some young people, including my own son, who was, these young people, they were around 20 at the time, 20 years old. And that was very interesting because I must say I was shocked and they were very much shocked about how people behaved at the time. And they asked so many questions, and they said, that's such an interesting story, make a film. And at the beginning I said, no, I mean, for me it's boring, I lived it, why should I make a film? And who cares about Mr. Waldheim? But then, slowly but surely, I myself got interested in going back into this, in this time of my life, in this time in politics, and to get a broader picture myself. Because, you know, when you are in the middle of something, you know only what happens around you. And this was a time before the internet and before social media and all this, even before satellite TV. So we really knew the Austrian TV, what Austrian TV showed, and not the other side. So that was very interesting for me suddenly, to go not only into the Austrian TV archive, but to put the whole thing in an international context, to show the conflict from different sides. So that's how it happened.
Also, I think there is this light music in the beginning and the end, and it's sort of a jazzy, like a variation, and one of your main motif that goes through your films, other films, is a memory. And here not you use the actual archive, actually like a digital memory, which you don't use usually. You use just your own footage. And for me, it was a sort of the whole idea of the film was not to point finger into Waldheim himself, but to sort of speak about this oblivion, like this lack of memory, this amnesia that caught Austria, of course, but then all other countries we have here the same experience. So what is this phenomenon of forgetting this kind of, because you said it was time to sort of break down this illusion that Austria was the first victim of Hitler's Germany. It was actually a younger brother, sort of, in this action.
Or an older brother, whatever.
Hitler was himself an Austrian.
Hitler was Austrian, yeah. Austrians like to forget that. Actually, it was high time for Austria that something like the Waldheim affair happened. And if it wouldn't have been Waldheim, it would have been someone else. Yeah, it was not important, but it was. I mean, it was in the mid-80s already. So for such a long time, Austria made the world believe, and started maybe to believe with itself, that it was a victim and not a perpetrator. And this lie kept the whole country, you know, when there's silence about a crime, it affects everything. So it was like, how do you say, Glasglocke? Glass jar, yeah, you know. And even if what you saw was quite nasty, what came out when the glass jar was lifted, it was good. In retrospect, I would say it was very healthy that it happened. And it was a total taboo to speak about the real victims, meaning the Jews, the Roma, the homosexuals, the real victims of the Nazis, because if Austrians were victims, then whose victims would the Jews be? Yeah? So somehow all this, I mean, in Vienna there were 180,000 Jews before the war, and after the war 2,000. So where did they go to? You know, where did all the goods and the buildings and the art? Nobody talked about it, you know. And it was quite terrible to live in such a place, because it was like poisoning the whole atmosphere. And when this happened, it was actually, he was elected, but only after he was elected, a big discussion started that took a couple of years. And there were discussions and podiums and every day almost. And people were really, people started to go to the archives to write new books. School children started to do research, you know, about the real story of Austria during Nazism. So finally, 5 years later, the chancellor, the socialist chancellor at the time, for the first time in 91, talked about Austria as being also not guilty, but also partly guilty, you know, for the first time in 91. So it took a long time to get rid of this illusion or lie, because why? Why the lie? I mean, in the case of Mr. Waldheim, I think it was quite obvious, because, as I say in the film, when he started his career, it was not very good to have been close to someone like General Löhr, who was hanged in Belgrade. Everybody knew at the time who this person was and what had happened. So I think his lying started then, and then maybe he believed his own lies. and so on. But for Austria, it was also a very good thing, because everybody talked about the ugly Germans, but the nice Austrians, and tourists came, and Austria didn't have to pay reparations, or in a very small amount.
Sound of music, whatever,
yeah. I mean, so the profit was there for a certain time.
I would have two questions, because seldom you have the possibility to ask the one who dedicated the movie to somebody who is the one who is dedicated to. So I would like to ask, who is Lee, and why did you dedicate the movie to Lee? Peterson.
Who?
Lee,
Lenny.
Lenny.
That's my son.
Sorry,
That's
Lenny.
my
Yeah.
son.
And why did you dedicate it to him? And second question is, you mentioned something like maybe it wasn't by accident that you found your material right at this time, nowadays. Like in a rhetorical question, how would you answer your own rhetorical question?
I dedicated it to my son because I said before, he was the one who really pushed me to make the film. And it's also good to tell your children something about your own life. And this was an important moment in my life, so that's why. And I dedicated to Lenny, and then there is in memory of Hubertus Czernin. And Hubertus Czernin was the Austrian journalist who brought the whole thing up. I say it in the film, and towards the end of the film you see an interview with him. It's the guy who has this hole here. And he was a wonderful person, and and he died much too young, couple of years ago. So, for your other question, well, when I started to work on the film, of course, I thought it would be a very small film for an Austrian public. And then I started in 2013, and a year later doing research. And then I stopped because I made The Dreamed Ones. And I only worked on this film again in the end of 2015. And in the editing room and during the writing of the text in 2017, all of a sudden the film became so timely, because all of a sudden we had Donald Trump, we had Orban already for a certain time, and then it was quite obvious that we in Austria would also have the government we have now. So that's why I say maybe I asked this rhetorical question, because all of a sudden I realized that what I did and do is not only important for Austria, but it shows something that happens in other countries as well. Meaning that politicians lie about their past. I mean, when I was showing the film in Belgrade, people said their president, who was Vučić, was with Milosevic, and then whatever, you know the stories. And the other thing, which is more important even, I think, is that to show the mechanism how political parties win elections. Populist parties win elections. I mean, how you can create an enemy, in that case the East Coast, the Americans, the Jews, to unite to get this patriotism at home. I mean, you know all this, and I think that happens today. I mean, our government won the elections with one scene, which was migration and enemies who are on the route from the Balkans to come to Austria in thousands and thousands, and whatever horrible things will happen. So it's the same mechanism that works all the time. So that's was most important for me to show.
First of all, greetings and welcome to Sarajevo.
Thank you.
My question is, how was your writing process done?
Good question.
I wanted to know more about that thing.
I made a couple of films with an off text, and that's very difficult because you have to work all the time with the image and the footage. You cannot just sit at home, write the text, record the text, and that's it. So it's a constant process of writing something and then trying it out in the editing room, because you don't want to duplicate what you see. You don't want to repeat it, and sometimes it's good when you repeat it in a certain moment. Yeah, so it's like a wave. It comes together and it parts the image or the footage and the text. Yeah. I made one film called A Fleeting Passage to the Orient, which is really a camera film, meaning shot in Egypt, only images, no interviews, no people who speak, and the text. So this was the most difficult project, because we couldn't start editing without a text, because you need a chronology of scenes. Yeah, why start here and not here? Yeah, so I had to write a draft of a text, but then it changed and changed again and again. In this case, and after a couple of years of experience, I did something I never did before. My editor, he installed a microphone in the editing room, and I just talked to the images, like a draft. Of course, then I rewrote it, but it helped because I was very close to the material. And in the end, film is a very down-to-earth thing. Yeah, you cannot just sit at home and write, or have a great concept and then try to, when you already shot the film, try to follow your concept in the editing room. You have to forget your concept, in a documentary film, and start to invent the film with the material you have. This is also something you have to learn, because if you stick too much to the concept you had before, then you don't make a good film, because you have to throw away what doesn't work and work with the things that make sense. Yeah. So in this case, this was a very good thing to start to talk to him, to the film, in the editing room.
Actually, Bresson said that the film dies 3 times. From the idea to the script, from the script to the shooting, and from the shooting, the material to the editing. So it dies. You have to reinvent it every time.
Yeah.
In your case, it's because I would like to just connect that to your actual creative process. You are like maybe the epitome of the camera stylo. You like to write with your camera. How did you actually decide it? Because you were the editor of some magazines and some very and then you decided to. How did you choose filmmaking as as the way you communicate with the world?
Well, I never went to film school, and didn't think of becoming a filmmaker. I worked as a journalist, and I wrote, and I did photography. And after I finished my studies, I didn't know what to do, and I met some people, and finally we founded a film distribution company in the end of the 70s, because in Austria you didn't have political films, or not only documentaries, political art house films, you know. So as we were on the left and we wanted to change the world, we wanted to bring films to Austria about South Africa, about the fight for abortion, and so on, yeah. So all these themes against atomic energy, yeah, and all these subjects. So we founded a film distribution company, which still exists and is now big. I'm not part anymore of it. I worked there for 7 years, and now it's the biggest Austrian film distribution company, and owns a cinema, 2 cinemas, and so on. Good. And so we distributed films, and we found out that there are no films about the Austrian situation. So we started to make films by ourselves, just without having any idea how to make films, about a strike, which was something rare in Austria at the time, and so on. So we made some films which I would call leaflet films, you know, like Godard and others at the time. You just did militant films, didn't care too much about the aesthetics and so on. You had no money, I mean, just did it. And we used 16mm because at the time this was the most advanced media. In every church, in every community youth hostel or whatever, they had a projector. And we traveled with the films and we discussed the films. So. And then I started to become more interested in making films and making more advanced films and not just militant films.
Leaflet.
Yeah, and that's how it started actually.
Yeah, and you always, most of the time, you shoot your own material with a cameraman or you
with
yourself,
a crew.
yeah.
With a crew.
Yeah.
Yeah, I work usually with a crew of 3, 4, 5 people. It depends. When I make a documentary. And they are quite different. I mean, there's not always a text, an off text. I made some films which are like East of War, which you showed here, or American Passages. There's no text.
No comments, yeah.
No text. East of War is a documentary about former soldiers of the German army, and it's only discussions between them or interviews, yeah. So it's a straight documentary. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here for this discussion. I want to go back to a point you made earlier about patriotism and what it is that got the people to vote for him again. What's your impression of that? Because you said you were also an activist at the time. What did you think?
That people voted for him?
Yeah, to become the president. What did you think? Because it was quite widespread at the time that he was part of the crimes that had taken part, yet he was still elected president. So what was it that caused him to get the majority again? What do you think?
Because I mean, he at the time, this generation was still alive who had been in war, and who had been soldiers themselves. So, I mean, what was so... He made a mistake during his election campaign by saying, I only did my duty in the army. This was the truth, actually. Austria was like part of Germany, yeah? So he did his duty in the German army. But the official Austria, it was so distorted, you know. He should have said, I was forced in the Wehrmacht, in the German army. this was the official line, that poor Austrians, I mean, who just welcomed Hitler, and Hitler was an Austrian, everything all forgotten. Poor Austrians were forced in the German army, but they were resistant fighters, whatever, yeah, they were against. So actually he told the truth by saying, I did my duty. And in a way this was like a relief for so many Austrians of his generation who also were soldiers and talked among them in the Wirtshäuser, in the restaurants, yeah, with wine and beer. They talked about the war all the time. But the politicians said Austria was a victim. So the whole thing was completely a paradox and absurd. So his whole generation voted for him, even if they were socialists and not from his party, the Conservative Party.
So in your opinion,
and it worked, this patriotism and all this hate speech against the Americans and the Jews worked very well.
This is also what I wanted to ask you. You have follow
no.
up? Okay.
I don't. Is this answering your?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
So basically, you're saying it's because they were sidelining with what he went through, and so
Yes,
many others went
yes.
through as well.
And I mean, he was, of course, it was never proven that he was involved in crimes, and he probably not even was a convinced Nazi. The problem was, and that was our argument, that he's lying. He wrote 2 books, not talking about very important, and lying about these years. I mean, he said he was in Vienna, he studied, in fact, he was in the Balkans, yeah, I mean. And he was not able to say in the beginning of this campaign, sorry, for that and that reason I didn't write about it, but now I give you the whole story. He never really talked about it in a way that people could understand where he really was and what he did. Not till the end of his life. I mean, never. A very strange man, yeah.
Well, but this is also like it spreads around. It's the whole country, because even you mentioned in one of your interviews that somebody says, oh, Simon Wiesenthal said, did he first discover this thing about Waldheim? He says, no, he almost didn't look for that.
No.
And even Waldheim was sent to UN by Bruno Kreisky, who was one of the most popular politician in Vienna, in Austria, and he was Jewish. So it was a very bizarre situation, like somebody put a rug on everything, and okay, now we start again.
Yeah, but Kreisky was part of this lying system of lies, because he paid a high price of becoming Chancellor of Austria being a Jew. He took 4 real Nazis, SS, in his first government. So, you know, this is a very complicated and neurotic story. Huh?
Yeah, it's very familiar here. We know about that kind of political expedience. And also you mentioned yesterday that like you think the situation is worse actually, because after Waldheim we thought, okay, this can never happen again. You know, we disclosed this guy who was the General Secretary of United Nations, and now you have like a very worrying revival of the Nazis, actually around here, not in Croatia a little bit in Serbia, in Bosnia, so, and of course
in Italy, in Hungary.
And in the United States, they even have this, that was a paradox, that was really bizarre, that the same guy who says Jerusalem is the capital of Israel is the same guy in which his supporter says, Hail Trump. Which is so bizarre. Like, what kind of situation we're living, what kind of a political context we're living now, because it's so absurd.
Yeah, but I have no answer to this question. Unfortunately, I can only say that I think the situation is much more frightening today, because at the time we were dealing with the past, and we wanted to get rid of these lies. But today, for a better future and a better open society, and Austria changed very much for the better after this affair, became much more open-minded and international and so on. And what happens today is that these people, they are very successful in changing our life and our future, not for the better, but the other way around. And our government, in only 1 year, they are like every day something new, some new idea, to have new laws, to have even more security and more police and more this and that, I mean, everything is around migration and security. That's the only thing and the population like it up till now. So I think that's much more worrying. And what the big difference is that at the time Austria was isolated. During the 5 years Waldheim was president, he was not invited. He was only invited to the Vatican and to some Arab countries. No guests came to Austria, official guests. Many artists did cancel their concerts, whatever. So it had a big impact. And today, in the European Union, as we are in the European Union now, Austria is not isolated anymore. I mean, you have Hungary, you have Italy, and you have the extreme right strong party in France, and so on and so on. So this is much more frightening, I think, than a small country like Austria at the time. So that was not so.
Do you mean the Austrians became conservative through the making fear, like a Christian Democrat Party?
I didn't understand.
Did the Austrian become more conservative because they were infused with fear of?
And they show
today, yes, there's fear everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, and they show Christian Democrat Party shows always that it's like family important, and through the migration it's dangerous to damage this family picture of conservative life, and that's going because of that.
And Christian life, I mean.
Of course, it was in Waldheim the same way. He shows that he's nice family guy and everything, and the Austrian like that.
Yeah.
And still now, like Kurt is really the chancellor. It's making similar thing, and they won. So.
Yeah, of course. It's fear. Fear is all over the place, and I think this fear has a long story because, people are so afraid of so many things today. What they eat, about allergies, the whole life changed in since the year 2000 or 2003, I don't know when, but these last 10, 15 years, people are frightened that their kids will have a wound somewhere, I mean, if the grass is too high, there are the, Zecken.
Yeah,
pigs. What, I mean, it's part of this, everything is, they are frightened of so many things. And they are frightened of the others. There's these strangers that come. And Islam, and, and if there's robbery or someone is killed and it's someone from Chechnya, then it becomes such a big deal that it's like, I mean, there are problems. I'm not saying that there are no problems, because we have so many young men who are alone, refugees who came alone, and of course, I mean, young men, so there are problems, but what the government does today is to cut funds for German courses and to support people to integrate. And because they want them to leave as fast as possible.
Pošto ja bolje govorim bosanski, ja ću na bosanskom. Pitao bi samo da li misli da danas političari manje lažu nego u vrijeme Waldheima?
Do you think that politicians are lying less or more than during Waldheim?
I can't answer this question either.
Ne može odgovoriti na to pitanje.
What do you think?
Šta vi mislite?
Mislim da lažu više i da lažu samo u interesu da ostanu na vladi. Uvijek interes tu, a svijet je pun licemjera da ne može biti licemjerniji.
That they lie more and that the only interest is how to maintain the position, the government, how to maintain the governance position, and that the world is full of hypocrites, which is the state of the world. Takav je svijet. I would go a little bit to one of my favorite films of yours, which is American Passages, which was very interesting for me because it resonates a little bit with this, but it resonates with this thing that you spoke about, this very strange situation in which we live, and what was fascinating for me, all these characters. Where did you find these amazing people that you used in American Passages? All the way to this Jerry character, Jerry Goldberg, I think, in Las Vegas. Where did you find them? I mean, you found them from the junkies to...
Well,
What kind of research did you do, and how long did you spend on the road?
I did a lot of research, and in the end I changed everything. Well, what is research? For me, research starts with reading many books, or going to museums, or looking into books on American art, photography, and so on. So it's a very broad research. Reading about the American Constitution and about the American dream, and so on. So I was always interested in utopian concepts. So I made a film. One of my first films is Return to Vienna, about socialists, communists in Vienna between the two wars. Red Vienna, I don't know if you know. Vienna was a city in the 1920s which was very modern, and the social democracy at the time really did a lot for the people who lived there, housing, and so on. So this was utopia of socialism. Then I made a film in Israel about the utopia of Zionism, and America was also an utopian concept. And when the financial crash happened in 2008, and at the same time it was quite possible that Obama would win the elections, I thought this is the moment to make a film in America, because I think for documentaries the right moment is very important, and it's always good when something breaks up or comes out or happens, like the crash. So people are, or like a strike, when people are getting out of their routine. That's a good moment to make a documentary, because there is a conflict in the air, and film needs conflict, I think. Even if the conflict is between you as a filmmaker and nature, can be a soft conflict. So I thought this is the good moment, and I before we had the budget, I went with a cameraman, to New York the days of election, and we shot these scenes in Harlem, the beginning of the film. Oh yeah, you didn't see the film, so I talked to people who didn't. So the film starts in Harlem, in New York, the night when Obama was elected, which is very emotional, of course, and was really, I'm so happy that I've been there, because it was really an emotional moment. There's someone you see him in the film who says, "Now, finally we are free." He shouts, "We are free, we are free." So it was like finally the end of slavery, you know. This was a great moment. And then during the year 2009 and 2010, I made several trips and shot in 11 states. And of course, you found a very divided country. And the one shooting period was 3 weeks with a crew, and another week separately we shot in Las Vegas. I have a lot of material. Las Vegas was one of the most interesting places. There you really can feel capitalism and rich and poor, like to the extreme. Yeah. So this was another week, and I think there was maybe another couple of days in New York. So all in all, 5 weeks of shooting. And well, I also did research to find protagonists, and the only people I researched who are in the film are the two fathers.
Oh,
there is a gay couple which adopted 2 children. So they are in the film, in Phoenix, Arizona. But for the rest, you know, I always like to have a goal. Let's say you have something happens in Oklahoma. You go there, and then you film something completely different, because when I'm doing a documentary like that, I'm all the time researching. You know, even if we have a coffee in a cafeteria, I'm there. My crew has to have the equipment always with them. And that's how we went. In the end of the film, you see a casino. So my film is the only one where you can see a real casino. I didn't know that. All the casinos you see in a film are fake, because you're not allowed to shoot in a casino. People don't want to be filmed when they play, when they gamble. So we have been in Las Vegas, and my sound engineer, he told me, I met such an interesting guy and blah, 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 blah. And I said, I was not interested. And finally, almost the last evening, he made me hear his recording. He had recorded this guy. And I was immediately interested to meet him. And it was 10 in the evening. He called him, and he was gambling, because he was a professional gambler. And he said, "Come to the casino, let's meet there." So we go to the Hilton Hotel, and we go in with all our equipment. We meet him on the roulette table. He gambles all the time. And we start talking. And at a certain point, I said, "Jerry, let's go somewhere where we can make an interview with you." Because I knew that you cannot shoot it. And he said, "Let's do it here." So as he was, everybody knew him, he called the boss, and he said, "They will film here." So we filmed him at the roulette table.
Yeah, I know, it's a fascinating ending of the film.
But he was a terrible guy. I mean, he talks badly about Negroes, and he uses the word Negro. And that was one of the reasons why the film, and he uses the word fuck. So these two words are no-go in the United States. That was one of the reasons why this film was never shown in the United States, not even at a festival.
Really?
Yeah.
That's bizarre. Because this character is for me, that was such an amazing ending for this American Passages, because this guy is such a, I don't know, is a epitome of the dream.
Yeah, but you know,
he doesn't care.
America is a Puritanist country, and the N word and the F word are no-goes.
Except in Tarantino's film.
In a fiction film, yeah. But and they don't like a European coming and showing them the mirror or a mirror, you know.
Yeah, I know they hated Lars von Trier for the Dogville, and
of course they don't like that.
Yeah.
But for me, I was interested. And I like the US, and I don't think that the film is so negative.
No, at all.
But for me, the interesting thing was to go to America as a European, and we are in the making, at the time, at least we were very much hoping to build the United States of Europe. So I wanted to see what is it, what holds it together, and what does the American dream still exist, and how? So I went there with a European gaze to perspective.
There's a sort of like a multi-layered polyphonic structure. There's so many things. It's not when you say it's not negative. It's just an eye to a certain place, and it's a passage. It's called Passages. You just see these people. And what was also, you mentioned the Europeans making films about the United States. And one of the most famous film about the United States, probably Wenders's films, Paris, Texas. And while he's fascinated by the space, you are, as always, fascinated by the people.
Yeah.
And it's like, I saw it as a sort of landscapes of faces and people. And that was really beautiful.
I always say one day I will make a film only about landscape, but I'm not sure. I mean, you know, you cannot make. You have always accept your own character and temperament. I'm not the person who can stay a whole day and wait that the sky would change. You know, I'm just. It's not. Probably I'm not interested enough in that. So some things you never do. You always have a project far.
Yeah.
It's not my...
Also, what is fascinating about your career is the fact that all these films that I've seen, and hopefully the audience saw more than just one, they're so different. You just choose a certain... You don't stick to a certain form or stick to a certain way of making films. You just go up and down. And what kind of this approach you have? Like there is no one approach to the films. Usually authors, they have a sort of a style and they stick to it and then change it a little bit. But you really made this almost 180 degrees turns. Dreamed Once, for example, was a total surprise after American Passage.
Well, I'm an adventurer. And I think there are filmmakers who try out new things. And even Haneke made the White Ribbon. But okay. Oh, Agnès Varda, she tried so many styles and things, and Chris Marquet, I mean, it's not always the same.
No, of course
he
not.
Also made a kind of fiction films, La Jetée.
With the photographs,
Yeah. So I'm a very curious person, and I like challenge. So I don't want to repeat myself or do something I know that I can do, you know. So I try to find something challenging with every project.
Will you go for a full fiction?
Good question. I mean, the dreamed ones are kind of a hybrid, but quite fictional.
Yeah, it's a fictional film, but it's like there is a lot of there's a little bit of meta filmical, autoreferential.
Yeah.
And when he comes and sort of you think you're in this relationship, and then he comes and fix the mics. So
yeah, and I mean, it's a film about the love story about two poets. Maybe Paul Celan is known here. I don't know. I don't know. He's well, two poets, and they had they physically were together not more than 3 months, but they had a beautiful correspondence of jealousy, of love, of hate, of all kinds of things for a long period of time, 20 years. And the film is about this love story. A real genre film, a typical fiction film. I don't know, what I don't really like is to write a script and stick to the script, you know? Because if you have all the dialogues and everything's already on paper, why make the film? I don't know. Maybe if I find the script someone else has written, it would interest me, but I don't know. I would like to do something to continue in the dreamed ones, yeah, to do something more controlled and not be on the road and have this crazy shooting period when you don't sleep, you don't eat, and you know. I mean, with age, I'm not so much interested to be on the road day and night. So, but that's not the reason. I would do it if it's interesting for me. But I would like to do something more controlled, but I'm not sure that I'm interested in a typical fiction film.
I mean, I would like to also to return to very it was a very original choice of telling the love story between Paul Celan and Ingeborg Bachmann. Because for me,
it's translated, by the way. You can read it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, Paul
it's
Celan
translated in many
famous.
languages. I think it exists in Serbo-Croat, whatever your language. You can read that. I mean, it's the same.
Yeah, Paul Celan was. I mean, I think we translated him before he died, so it was rather famous. And also, what for me was very interesting in this film is that you sort of there was this experience of him that he had to write in the language that was the language of his murderers. I mean, of the people who murdered his family. And because he wrote in German, he's one of the biggest German poets in 20th century. And for me, this insisting on recording the sound of these letters, I remembered he has this book of poetry called Sprachbilder. The
Sprachgitter.
Gitter. How do you say that? Rešetke jezika.
Rešet is gitter?
Rešetka.
Rešetka.
It's like it was one way to sort of express this jail of language that Jews of Europe, who, I mean, in this part mostly spoke German.
He was from Chernovci, which is in Ukraine today, and there was a big Jewish community there.
And I mean, this also relates
German-speaking community.
Yeah, your choice to do everything in recording studio and just focus on language, and then it strikes me. How do you feel also because your family also had a Jewish experience and you speak the language of the people who destroyed practically European Jews, this and Jewish experience is obviously very important in your work. How do you feel? How do you relate personally to it also?
To language or to
Jewish language experience? And Jewish experience.
Well, when I grew up in Vienna, this was not a good place to be for Jews and for kids. I mean, it was really a very small community and very much in the closet. Only during the Waldheim affair, the Jewish community for the first time went out of the closet and had a press conference and showed itself in the public, you know. So, me and my friends, we didn't like, and we told our parents, why did you stay here? Why did you have kids here in this country? How could you stay in a country where you were thrown out and your family's murdered and so on? Yeah? So this was very strange and painful childhood and youth, and you had, I mean, some didn't have anti-Semitic experiences. I had many in school, and most of the Jews who built this new community in Vienna, because Viennese Jews didn't come back. My mother was one of the few who came back, and only because she met my father. And most of the Jews who built this new community were survivors from Hungary, from Poland, and from Romania, who have been displaced persons in Austria and stayed for a certain reason, because they started to make business and so on. Like my father, he was in the Red Army during the war, and after the war he went to Bucharest, and then in 1948, when the communists took his small shop away, he was running away to Vienna. So he started from scratch, you know, a life there. And so this whole community didn't have any contact to what had happened in Vienna to the Jews, because they were foreigners. They just came to a new place. And so I had this feeling of growing up in kind of an exterritorial space, yeah. I loved to read, and I began to build my Vienna by reading Schnitzler and Kafka, who was not Viennese, but all this kind of Habsburg Austrian literature, Joseph Roth and so on. So my positive feelings for this space I lived in was through literature actually. So language, and I love the Austrian language, and for this film, The Dreamed Ones, I didn't want to take German of Germany, speaking actors. Yeah, no, it was very important for me to have this Austrian sound in the language, which is quite different from the German, even if it's the same language. So that's how. Well, that's how it. I mean, this is a long story.
And you're still in Vienna.
Yeah, I went away many times, I must say. I lived in Israel for a year, New York for a year, in France for many years, 5 years. I always came back to Vienna. So because, that's my stories and my thoughts are rooted there in this hate and love for the city. I've not much in common with the rest of Austria, but Vienna is my city, And I said I grew up without knowing anything about Jewish history of Vienna. And in '85 I published a book because I moved in a, how do you say, Wohngemeinschaft? How would you say? When you live with, as a student, shared with other young people in the 2nd district of Vienna. And only then I discovered that in this district, before the war, there were 60% of the population were Jews. And it was a workers' district, so it was left-wing Jews and all these youth movements of the socialists and communists and left Zionists and so on. And I discovered Jewish history of Vienna, and I published this book, which became a bestseller, because it was for the first time that this was brought up again in '85. Yeah, today you have many books, but I collected many photographs and texts and so on. So because the people I grew up, this community were people from Eastern Europe. So they didn't know any, and my own mother grew up in Vienna, but she left Vienna when she was 14, and she made a complete cut, She didn't tell me anything about her youth and what she had. Only later, when I started to ask her, when I became interested in Jewish history of Vienna. So
yeah, and she appears in Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay.
Yeah, she also appeared in Paper Bridge. Yeah.
And you're also especially in Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay, you speak about this drama of migrating, uprooting yourself and go somewhere else, but also sort of in the present day necessity of mixing with other people. That it's so important that we are not stay all the time the same.
Yeah, and even if you stay at the same place, I think there is no. Everything is changing anyway. I mean, you cannot say this is it and it will not change. Well.
So, anybody had some more questions? Yes, please.
Just regarding the Dream Drones, I happen to be a big fan of Anya Flash and her music.
Yeah.
I just wondered, how did you happen to collaborate with her?
Do you know her as a musician? She's a
Yeah,
very Soap and Skin.
Yes.
She's quite great musician, I think, composer and singer and texter and everything in one. Well, I did casting, and I saw many actresses and actors, and I worked with a caster, a professional casting woman, and she had the idea that Anya would be good for this role. And when I met her, I immediately liked her a lot. And I think she has such an aura and such a personality that I decided to work with her. And I must say it was a good choice to work with one actor. The guy is an actor, professional actor, and with someone who is not an actress, because there was a lot of tension between them from the beginning. I mean, we didn't rehearse. I didn't want to rehearse. I just met them twice together because I wanted to see them together and know how they react each other. And it was a very interesting situation because she was nervous because she was not an actress and he's an actor. And he was nervous because she's a diva, she's known, much more known internationally than him. So it was a good thing that they didn't know each other. And actors, in a city, they know each other. So they didn't know each other and they came from different angles. And that was quite productive for the film. Yeah.
The first one is about those who stay, those who go, because you mentioned the fact that you're working with a crew. Is it the case in those who stay and those who go?
With the script?
Crew. With the crew.
Yes.
Ah.
Because several times in the movie you can see yourself like
Yeah.
you seem to be alone.
Well, this was a special film. Those Who Stay, Those Who Go is a small film with a small budget, and it's like a compilation of things I shot myself, things I found in my own archive. So it's kind of more on the experimental side. I mean, there's not a clear narration. So I worked for some scenes with a crew, but many times shot myself, took the camera myself. And even in the editing process, usually I work with an editor. And with this film, it happened that we came to a point where we were stuck. And then my assistant at the time said, you should, and my editor, he said, try to work alone a little bit. And I was afraid to work with the Avid and Final Cut and all these programs. And my assistant said, I will put the whole thing on QuickTime, which is, just like a sausage. So the sound and the images, they are together. And then it was really like writing. I didn't have to explain or to discuss, I just did what I felt to do. And I remember once or twice I got up at night because I had an idea, and I went to the editing room, which is not in my apartment, so I went at night to this place and worked on it, So it was a very special situation for 2 or 3 weeks. And I found the structure like that. Sometimes it's important that you just you work with your intuition, and you don't have to explain what you want to do. Even when you have the camera in your own hands and you are alone, you don't have to explain. In the moment you have a camera person, you have to say, do this or that, which means that you have to think about it and maybe censor yourself. Because you think, maybe it's not good, why should I tell him? If you have the camera yourself, and today with digital, it doesn't cost money. So you just do it. Don't use this censorship inside yourself is gone. So sometimes that's important, I think.
I had a second question about Waldheim Waltz, because you mentioned the fact that you were a journalist as well. And in this movie, you're like using footage of things you shot yourself as an activist. Would you say that you have more freedom as a documentary filmmaker than of a journalist to touch topics which you're involved in?
Of course. A journalist has the media, the bosses, the censorship of TV. I mean, I'm an independent filmmaker, I can do what I want. I never got a commission from Austrian TV all my life. I mean, they bought my film, or they co-financed my films, but they never said, make a film for us.
But even like morally, because as a journalist, I'm a freelance journalist, like we're often told that we should not work on topics we are deeply involved in. Like, it's a kind of ethic question. And as a documentary filmmaker, like, do you think it's different?
As a journalist, they were told not to do subjects that are very involved emotionally, and as a documentarist,
I think that's the most stupid thing one could tell. It's the same as be objective. Yeah, I mean, who can be objective? That's a big lie, I think, and I know that it's a very common lie, because I had many discussions now with Waldheim. not with Waldheim, but about this film, with school classes in Austria. And there was always at a certain point the question, shouldn't a documentary be objective? And then I start to explain that this is not possible. Yeah, I think nobody can be objective. Even the news you hear on the radio, there is someone who chooses what to put it, what is worthwhile to put in the news and what you leave out. So that's already a human being or many human beings who decide on that. Yeah. So what is objective? I mean, that you don't have your opinion, that you try to be neutral. I think it doesn't work. So I think one should tell young people and make them aware exactly that everything we hear and know is man-made. Yeah, even what you have on Facebook is somebody puts it there. Yeah, it's not just there. It's not God who decides what to cut and what to leave out. And even where you put the camera, he puts his camera here. And if he puts it here, it's another perspective and another angle which changes everything. So if I shoot only you or I shoot the whole room, it tells you another story. So, I mean, in everything there is some opinion. Even if you don't, it must not be a political opinion, but it's not objective.
I mean, image per se carries ideology.
Of course, and it would be so important today with all these fake news and all these social media to teach this, to make kids already show them that even in TV films for kids about animals, that, for instance, that they use the image of this bee several times in different contexts. So is it the same bee? Who did it? Why? You know, really analyze the material and find out what is how it's fabricated.
That kind of deconstruction was a kind of popular actually in 60s and 70s. There was a famous How to Read Donald Duck.
Exactly.
Where there is an analysis of what actually Donald Duck represents, because it's all ideological matrix. It's normal.
Yeah.
And I think this is the basic lesson at the film school, at least.
To analyze the material,
to know what it is, and when you put camera, as you said, like this, and especially when you start cutting.
Yeah. Sure.
You're out there, totally. So. Any more questions?
The famous experiment of Kuleshov.
Yeah, of course, the Kuleshov experiment, where he proved that everything in film is created by the author, not by actors, not by real space, but just by you. I mean, you're film students all, right?
No, by the choice, which scenes you put one after the other. Like Chris Marker said, the intelligence of the film is in the editing.